Welcome. Today I will be giving a short author presentation on Harper Lee. Nell Harper Lee was born on April 28, 1926 in Monroeville, Alabama. The youngest of 4 children, she grew up as a tomboy in a small town. Her father was a lawyer and a member of the Alabama state legislature, and also owned part of a local newspaper. For most of Lee's life, her mother suffered from mental illness, rarely leaving the house. Some speculate that she might have had bipolar disorder. One of her closest childhood friends was another writer-to-be, Truman Capote, then known as Truman Persons. Tougher than many of the boys, Lee often stepped up to serve as Truman's protector. Truman, who shared few interests with boys his age, was picked on for being a sissy and for the fancy clothes he wore. While the two friends were very different, they both shared in having difficult home lives. Truman was living with his mother's relatives in town, and after being largely abandoned by his own parents. In high school, Lee developed an interest in English literature. After graduating in 1944, she went into an all-female Huntington College in Montgomery. Lee stood apart from the other students. She couldn't have cared less about fashion, makeup, or dating. Instead, she focused on her studies and specifically on her writing. Here on the right, we can see a picture of the wall that separated her and her friend Truman's house that they used to jump over to see each other. Having written several long stories, Harper Lee found an agent in 1959. The following month, at Michael Brown's East 50th townhouse, she received a gift of a year's wages, with them a note, and it said, "You will have 1 year off from your job to write whatever you please. Merry Christmas." So she began to write her first book, eventually what would be known as To Kill a Mockingbird. She claims that it is not an autobiographical fiction. However, there are many similarities between her and the main character, Scout. Lee's father was a Southern lawyer, like Atticus. According to the childhood friends, Lee was a tomboy, like Scout. And Lee had a special friend like Dill, because every summer the boy who would become the celebrated author Truman Capote used to visit. Many believe that Lee was influenced by what influences many writers, and that was her own personal experience. In addition, Lee wanted to say something about the civil rights movement, which was at its height in 1960 when the book was published. Even though the setting of the book is in the 1930s, the novel has much to say about the fair treatment of all people, especially African Americans. She eventually showed the manuscript to Toy Hohoff, an editor at the J.B. Lippincott and Company. At this point, it still resembled a string of stories more than a novel, like Lee had intended. Under Hohoff's guidance, 2.5 years of rewriting followed, and when the novel was finally ready, she opted to use the name Harper Lee, rather than be misidentified as Nellie. The correct way to pronounce it is Nell. In July of 1960, To Kill a Mockingbird was published, and was an immediate bestseller, had great reviews, and even won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction in 1961. In 1999, almost 40 years after its publication, it was voted as the best novel of the century by a poll in the Library Journal. Only 2 years after the publication of the book, a movie was made about the story. Harper said, "I think it is one of the best translations of a book to film ever made." Then, by the mid-1960s, Lee was reportedly working on a second novel, but it was never published, which makes To Kill a Mockingbird the only novel she ever published. In 2011, a close friend of Lee was interviewed, and he said that there were 2 reasons she told him why she didn't write anymore. Quote, "1, I wouldn't go through the pressure and publicity I went through with To Kill a Mockingbird for any amount of money. 2nd, I have said what I wanted to say, and I will not say it again." End quote. After the publication of To Kill a Mockingbird, she helped her friend Truman Capote. Lee was worked on with him on and off on In Cold Blood, a book that she helped Capote write. When Capote's book was finally published in 1966, a rift developed between the 2 friends and collaborators. Capote dedicated the book to Lee, but failed to acknowledge her contributions to the work. And even though this made Lee very angry and hurt, she still continued to remain friends with Capote for the rest of his life. In 2007, George W. Bush presented Lee with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. This is the highest civilian award in the United States and recognizes individuals who have made, quote, "an especially meritorious contribution to security or national interest of the United States, world peace, cultural, or other significant public or private endeavors." Today, Lee lives in an assisted living home in Monroeville, Alabama, the place of her birth, where she is wheelchair-bound and partially blind and deaf, in addition to suffering from memory loss. She is 87 years old. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed. Here are my cited sources.